Hey, everybody, welcome to the Grow Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Kevin McNulty, and this is your personal development school of growth, where each week my guests and I will bring and break down big ideas and practices that will help you learn, grow, and succeed in life. Thanks for checking us out. Now let the growth begin. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Grow Yourself, where we dive deep into the art and science of personal growth. Our mission is really simple, it is to invite guests, experts, thought leaders, so that we can ask questions to help us learn, change, and grow in life. So today we have really an extraordinary guest, Dr. Kyra Bobinet, a trailblazer who blends behavior change and neuroscience to unlock new levels of self-awareness and transformation. Dr. Bobinet has passionately pursued and studied the truth about behavior change for nearly 3 decades as a physician, public health leader, healthcare executive, and behavioral expert. An award-winning health innovator and thought leader, Dr. Bobinet has an MD from UC San Francisco School of Medicine and an MPH from Harvard University. She belongs to the Stanford School of Medicine AIM Lab, where she occasionally teaches on health behavior change, and CEO, founder of Fresh Try, a behavioral software based on the latest neuroscience of habit forming and lasting change. Her first best-selling book, Well-Designed Life, is a collection of globally influential brain science and behavior change. Dr. Bobinet is an enrolled member of Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota, and we're going to ask her about that. And she enjoys meditation, and medicine, by the way, horsemanship, and herbalism, and lives with her family and animals and plant teachers in California, Santa Cruz Mountains. Her first book, Well-Designed Life, 10 Lessons in the Brain Science and Design Thinking for Mindful, Healthy, and Purposeful Life. And now she has a book coming out in March called Unstoppable Brain, the new neuroscience that frees us from failure, eases our stress, and creates lasting change. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to Grow Yourself, Dr. Kyra Bobinet. Dr. Bobinet, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us. I'm truly excited about this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Listen, as I do with all my guests, I would first just love for you to just tell the audience a little bit about you, your background, maybe where you were raised. I want to interested to know more about your connection to the, is it Ibn say it again?
Ojibwe?
Ojibwe, yeah. Ojibwe, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about who is Kyra.
Yeah. So I was born in Iowa. My dad was 100% Bohemian Czech. He passed away a couple of years ago.
Oh,
and my mom is Ojibwe, and that's a indigenous tribe, native tribe up in Minnesota area. So Minnesota, Iowa. And then my dad was a military person. And so he grew up, I was grown up in the VA hospital system, kind of bouncing around all over the place. Not as much as maybe a military brat, but probably about 70%. Until we got to Oklahoma, and then my parents divorced, and they stayed in the same town. And then I finished junior high and high school there, and then went to college in Colorado, and then bounced around, went to, of course, medical school in San Francisco, and then Harvard, and then back to California. So I've pretty much sampled the United States and all the different regions. Yeah, I really appreciate everybody's point of view. Like, I feel like I'm a very neutral person for that reason in this world that we live in. I'm very much appreciate and empathize with everybody.
So you're a fellow brat, and I'm always grateful to be around a fellow military brat. Listen, there is so much. I think I mentioned earlier that when I first started researching, I did some research, a few days ago, and then I came back early this morning to kind of just read up on you and really dig in deeper. And I literally fell back on my chair and said, I'm not going to be ready for this woman. I mean, she is just you're so accomplished, and you seem to bring this really beautiful sort of spiritual and professional thing together in a very, very nice way. But let me ask you this as we get started. You said, I believe it was on your website or something that I read, you said, I want to free myself and others from the suffering we wallow in, or
Mm-hmm.
actively deny every day.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty doggone tall order, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm pretty bold when it comes to that kind of thing, but I'm super clear that my life is dedicated to the reduction of suffering. And I look for it everywhere, and I try to offer solutions. That's kind of how I came to neuroscience, is that, where is suffering except in the mental, there's pain, which can be anywhere in the body or anywhere in the emotional body. And then there's suffering, which is that kind of extra piece of this shouldn't be happening, get me out of here, that kind of stuff. And so really focusing on what we can alleviate in terms of how we address our pain, how we address our lives.
Well, just again reading up, and I've read some excerpts from your book, from your first book, and I have to be honest with you. The first thing that I thought when I was reading about it is, and we don't have to turn this into a religious conversation, but it was about Paul in the Bible, where
Yeah.
he said somewhere in Romans, I don't know, I think he was complaining to God, saying, "Why do I do the things that I shouldn't do, and don't
Hmm.
do the things I should do?" And that's essentially what you look into, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something in psychology called the no-do gap. I also call it the brain behavior gap, because I had a patient who was in a clinical study of mine named Lisa, and I did kind of a midterm interview with her to kind of see how the program was going. It was a weight loss program, and it was based on metabolic disease. And she at first is like, "Oh, I'm losing weight. I'm doing so great." And I was thinking like, yes. But then halfway through the interview, she pauses and she goes, "I know what I should do. I don't know why I don't do it." And for me, every patient that I've ever had, myself as a patient, when I'm in that role, myself trying to get myself to do things, and like, doesn't that kind of hit the nail on the head? It's
Yeah.
like we know what to do most of the time, and or we know what we want to do, and we don't get ourselves to do it. We just can't figure that out. And actually, it turns out that there's a brain area that is newly discovered and characterized that is causing all of this, and nobody knows about it. So now my mission is to like, really get the awareness out there around that.
I'm just going to be fully transparent that when I read some of that, and as I listen to you right now, I can only be honest with you and my audience and say I don't want to say struggle, I want to say suffered from this
Mm-hmm.
all my life.
Mm-hmm.
That
Me
and
too.
and it's ongoing. And as a
Mm-hmm.
coach, I see this in so many people that it's when people say, "Well, why do I need a coach?" and I say, "Well, almost just really just to push you, keep you accountable, because you know what to
Mm-hmm.
do, don't you?" And they go,
Mm-hmm.
"Yeah, I do."
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't
Mm-hmm.
you do it? I don't know. And I
Mm-hmm.
haven't been able to answer that question. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. So basically, we have an area in our brain called the habenula. No one has to remember that name, but it's Habenula. And it's about a half a centimeter big in the middle of your brain, right in front of the pineal gland. And basically, it has two jobs. One is that it acts as a failure alarm. If I think I failed at something, if I think I want to try to get myself to exercise, and then I see myself not doing it, then I think I failed, right? And this could be conscious or it could be subconscious. It could be in your sleep. It could be big, something I know I'm trying to do, and it could be something tiny. Like I meant to put the ketchup away last night and I didn't do it. Those are little tiny failure signals. And this part of your brain is counting those and alarming on those. And if it wakes up, if the alarm goes off, basically the second thing it does is it is a motivation kill switch for anything that you're trying to do in that category. And so if I try to exercise, if I say I'm going to try to exercise tomorrow, I don't do it, the brain keeps count, the habenula lights up, and then it kills my motivation to exercise the next day. And so there you can automatically see this thing from Paul, like that he's describing in the Bible, that we all, every single human being on this planet, you're not alone, nobody's alone,
Yeah.
has this gap. It's how we close the gap. It's how we understand what's at the bottom, and also that we don't blame ourselves for the gap.
That almost seems impossible to me from
Mm,
from the standpoint that I think, and so what I do, and again, is, and I suppose many do this. I don't feel like I'm alone in this, but that, so yes, I don't go to the gym, and then the next day I don't. And what I have to do is ramp myself back up. So
Mm-hmm.
psychologically get myself, okay, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to start back on Monday. And then I
Mm-hmm.
literally try to psych myself back up. But then I repeat
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over again. Is
Mm-hmm.
this typical?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to call it like habenula scars,
Mm.
So if I've tried something in the past, and I got myself to do it, and then I all of a sudden felt like I failed at it, and then I kind of like scorched earth, just like
Yeah.
that method won't work anymore. Then I've got to be creative and figure out, how do I get myself to do this? It's like one half of us is the person saying, let's go to the gym, like let's get this going. And the other part is like, no, like I failed last time, and so there's that negotiation that you're doing with yourself. And sometimes it needs a refresh. Sometimes it needs like a different, method, like maybe a different type of exercise, or maybe a buddy to go with you, or like you said, a coach to kind of help you go through these things that on your own, you've got all these habenula scars that would, convince you pretty well that you failed and that you shouldn't be doing this again.
Well, and again, I can only speak for myself, but being a coach, I hear this from others as well,
Yeah.
that it the sense of being of defeating yourself,
Yes.
the constant failing at trying again and trying again. In fact, I've often
Hmm.
said that on my gravestone I'm going to put, he really tried. I
There you
mean,
go.
well,
Yeah.
I mean, but I have, even in my own life, and again speaking with I realize that uh, this feeling of defeat goes really deep.
Hmm.
You just start saying, man, you really suck, Kevin, don't you? You can't seem to
Hmm.
get this right. Why can't you get up out of bed and head to the gym every morning?
And the reason why that happens is that this habenula part of your brain, it's like a thief in the night. You go to sleep and you wake up unmotivated, and then you blame yourself. The prefrontal cortex, the part of you that judges you, right, blames you for being lazy or being unmotivated. And this is such a common problem that people don't realize that they just tripped this part of their brain, and they focus their attention on how bad they are and how ashamed they are, and guilt and all those things, instead of like, oh, I must have thought I failed. Like a perfect example, last weekend I thought I failed at something because I didn't pay attention to a particular sequence of editing that was happening around the new book. And I had a deadline of Sunday night at 12:59 or 11:59 p.m. that kind of deadline. So I was just like, but I couldn't get myself to sit down and write because I had, not knowing to myself, I had thought that I failed at catching something and getting a certain deadline in, and I didn't have any motivation to edit anymore, to go back in, because I already had a failure around like, well, this should be done already, or I should have done it differently. And that shoulding, that failure disease, and there's so many types of failure, really shut off my motivation. And because I know the neuroscience, because I know that that's what's happening when I see a no do gap, I address it very differently than the rest of the population, because they're all stuck and I'm able to keep going. But I want to share that secret, or that recipe, with everybody.
And please do.
We're doing it right now.
Yeah, the this I'm so fascinated by this because of this repetitive, as I just mentioned, conversation that I've had going on with myself, and I being, one, a military brat, and
Mhm.
two, in the military for 20 years. I didn't give myself any breaks.
Right.
I didn't, I was like, Kevin, that's not good enough to just
Yeah.
say, hey, you're, you know, even my wife, she would try to sort of, console me about my lacking of habits, or good habits, or whatever the case might be. And I would say, nope, sorry, can't buy it.
Hmm.
I just need to get off my butt here,
Well, let me make another connection point then,
please.
because the habenula is also now being seen, like the most recent research in the last 3 years, like since COVID, even all the papers are showing that it is the culprit, the cause of depression. So if you kind of string these things together, I try something good for myself. I see that it doesn't happen. No do gap. I feel bad about myself. My motivation is gone, just gone, then I indict myself for not having motivation. Then that causes rumination. That is a state of depression.
Yeah, I've actually just been reading a bit about rumination and how that takes place. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I
Yeah.
think it's going to resonate with a lot of people, as you
Yeah,
probably well know.
exactly. Yeah. And so, myself and also my contemporaries about 10 years ago, we really thought we had answered this. Like the cause of depression is rumination, the self-focus, kind of like nobody, not good enough, like all that kind of running garbage that our brain somehow manufactures, is in the prefrontal cortex, specifically the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex for people who are nerdy. And so we thought that, that was what was causing people to kind of get down and be like, oh, I can't get out of bed kind of stuff, because the oppressiveness of that self-talk can be really debilitating. However, now that we know that there's a habenula that all of that stuff communicates with, we realize that that was just the cloud system, like all that rumination kind of is a setup for depression, but it doesn't cause depression, right?
Wow.
It's the habenula that's like, none of this matters. What's the point? There's no point to my life. There's no and in the extreme can get really dangerous for that person, right? And the only thing that shuts up the habenula without knowing about the habenula is numbing, is addictions. And so it's also very active and important for addictions.
Wow.
And the way I like to explain this more simply for people who are not scientists, because I don't expect the world to be scientists,
Sure.
is a brake pedal and a gas pedal in your car. So for years and years and years, we thought that the way to make people feel better was serotonin and dopamine, like the gas pedal, like feel good, like just go, 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 motivate, just do it, all that kind of stuff. And to some extent, in the beginning, you can kind of like ignore the failure and kind of go with it, like you can start to go after dopamine stuff. But the brake pedal was on the whole time. The brake pedal is
Oh,
the
my.
habenula. It's the anti-reward pathway, is what it's called in the literature. And so we were so focused on this dopamine system that we didn't realize the brakes were on the whole time. And so then, of course, somebody's going to be like, well, I can't get motivated. Like you're telling me just do it. I just can't do it, and then they blame themselves and they feel badly about themselves. And the brakes were on the whole time. And so now I really want to focus everybody on the brake. Like you have to disengage that brake, just like a real car. If you're punching the pedal to the metal, but your brake is on, you're not going anywhere.
This is so fascinating. This might explain why I've heard people speak, and I've spoke this myself, that a person has a feeling about themselves, that they believe, even from a spiritual standpoint, that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, God has a purpose for me.
Yeah.
And that then butts up against the idea that you keep failing it. You're thinking to yourself, man, I just know there's something inside of me that's trying to break
Mm-hmm.
out. Why
Mm-hmm.
won't it? And so there's these
Mm-hmm.
moments of pushing forward and feeling good about it. And then bam, you hit a brick wall. And it's like this constant thing going back and forth. And what you just said, I don't know if I'm just, making this up, but it sounds like it's that what you're talking about.
You're 100% correct. You're 100% correct. Like basically, from a clinical perspective, if you can't get yourself to do your purpose, if you're blocked, if you're stuck on your purpose, your habenula is on. Full stop. You have some form of failure disease that has tripped off your habenula and your motivation left town. And so how do you get it back? You have to So I did research on Walmart associates who, I was hired to look at, who was healthy, why, who, like how do people get healthy, that kind of thing. And in a very small percentage of, 1 million associates, there were people who could lose weight, get off their meds, really change their lives and maintain it. That second part is absolutely the holy grail, right? Because if you can't maintain it, 99% of things that people try backfire, right? because they don't know about the habenula, because they don't know that failure is the most important thing they should neutralize ever, right? And so these people were like, I don't know if you've heard of that show MacGyver, but like MacGyver was like this clever person who, could dismantle a bomb with a paperclip and a piece of gum, right? And so these people were like MacGyvers, they were able to persist and get and unstick themselves on a regular basis, where you could imagine everybody else got stuck to the flypaper, in their efforts to, or their desire to follow their purpose. These people were like on purpose, and they were able to clear all the obstacles because they would neutralize failure. And the way that they did that was two magical things. One is they, instead of setting a goal that was hard and fixed, they would set like a practice or an experiment. And the second thing is that instead of failing at said goal because it was fixed and defined and all these things, they would iterate. And that's like a big word, but I hope that by the end of this decade that everybody wants to know and is able to iterate, which means that you're tinkering and tweaking with the problem until it fits, or that it fits better and better. You're engaging yourself. That is the way that they were closing that no-do gap, was by iterating their way to success. And I have this phrase, like, iterators never fail. They never failed because it was not a failure. It was just like, well, that's just information I can use to keep iterating.
This was the, and so you mean to iterate and then reiterate, correct? In other words, to rethink it again and
Iterate
then think
is
it
like
again.
versioning, like, your phone is like version
Yes.
1, 2, 3, like, your experiment is updated through iteration. So I might, for example, there was one woman who, she was addicted to Dorito chips. And her way of losing weight was to lick a chip every day because she liked the flavoring, and throw away the actual chip. But at first she would eat the whole bag. Then she would iterate and be like, I'll leave one chip at the bottom of the bag. Then she iterated and was like, I'll leave 5 chips. Like she walked her way through to the end state where she licked one chip, threw it away, and she lost a ton of weight. So like, we don't want to have a diet of like lick a chip. We want to have a diet of figure out what works for you. Figure yourself out. Figure out what you will do, because that's your diet.
I mean, and the example is a great one, really. It's, I think, as you just said, it's this idea of iterating, just kind of playing around with it and trying another version and see what happens with it all. Well, Kyra, why do some suffer from this problem and others don't? Where does it start in the first place? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I don't know what your childhood was like, but mine was like, suck it up, and you're not good enough.
Yeah.
And so a lot of us in that category, who were raised that way, who were, imbued with a certain type of failure disease, we suffer from it. And if we can't conquer that, and usually what people do is they'll figure it out in their career, but they won't figure it out with their, eating, or they'll figure it out with their exercising, but they won't figure it out with their personal relationships. So we're very kind of categorical as humans, where we feel confident, and where we could just like perform, and set a goal and track against that goal. Like, that's a very high level of confidence and competence that you would use those tools. Everything else should be iteration. Everything else should be de-shaming and de-blaming the self by saying, well, I learned this and I'm going to now iterate in this way. That's the empowered state. That's you in control of you, you being able to engage you. Everything else is some shade of a setup for eventual failure.
This is just mind blowing. So where do emotions play in all of this? Because I submit that, I use this term, I didn't coin it, but this idea that, your emotions, hijack your thoughts, and then you're in for a ride for a minute, and so how can you rationalize, when your emotions are, holding you hostage, if you will?
Yeah, what I noticed in the MacGyvers is that the people who were able to change their, everything long term, is that they would not wallow in emotion. They would iterate even on their emotion. So they would have some inspirational, like, well, tomorrow's a new day. Today didn't go so well, but tomorrow's a new day. There was a letting go, there was a
Mm.
releasing, and all that mattered was that they were able to shorten the length in which they were wallowing, you know. And
Wow.
this is supported by something called the National Weight Loss Registry, which is just basically a proxy for any behavior change at scale. 10,000 people who have achieved long-term weight loss. The only thing different between them and everybody else who gained it all back or who didn't get any weight loss at all is that they would shorten the relapse periods. So whereas somebody who is, really having strong emotions, if they follow that ride, like you said, if they follow that thread, they could get lost down a
Hmm.
wormhole of that
Hmm.
feeling and it's not about denying your emotions. It's about shifting into the part of your brain that watches those emotions so that you have some distance. Instead of being in the water, you're watching above from the bank of the water. So that's a very important shift to do. Mindfulness helps with that. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps with that. Coaching, getting a therapist, just basically journaling, that kind of stuff. Anything that basically, neutralizes the sense that you feel like you're a failure.
And that stepping away from your emotions and being able to, I guess, let's say, observe it more objectively, that's then what allows you to iterate, correct?
Yeah, you can have a distance. Yeah, if I'm in the anger and I'm not able to go, oh, I'm angry, then I am just unable to really enlist the part of me that can be curious or that can be experimental or that can say, how about iterate in this way? How about iterate how you feel about that? Like those kinds of things.
What would you then say to the person listening or watching that, you know, that has gotten lost in their own mindset, in their own, maybe the larger wallowing, and that is that, I'm giving up. I've tried so many times. What would you say to them?
What I would say is you have a form of failure disease. It is not you. It is just something that is an incorrect view about your life. And the most important thing is that you neutralize failure. The most important thing, whether you reframe it, whether you digest it with somebody, you process that grief, whatever the case may be, whether you break that habit of comparison thinking or those things that are getting you down. Those kinds of things are all available to you, but the most important thing is to neutralize the failure, because as long as you think you failed at living your life, you're not going anywhere. The brakes are on. Like, it's very simple. And the good news is that when you have an iterative mindset, when you have this mindset, which is found in nature, people have it, and I want them to spread it to everybody else, then you really do have the ability to get progress on yourself. And that builds little grains of confidence up out of that hole that you feel like you're in. The hole you're in is basically the failure, you know? And so
Wow.
if you can get that out, then your natural motivation will come back, your natural good feelings will come back, all that kind of stuff. And the good news is that your mindset is a lead indicator. It's something that changes first. And you don't have to worry about, like, habit formation, which is a year-long process. Like,
Right.
if you just focus on your mindset drives your behavior, and you just keep reinvesting in that mindset and saying, well, how can I iterate? My company, we just iterate. Nobody fails. We just say, and we have at the end of the year, we've got iterator award. We've got, like, things to reward the process of iteration. It's not about winning and losing. It's about iterating. I'd rather have somebody on my team who could iterate their way out of hell than somebody who could perform the most extraordinary feat, of individual performance ever, because I know that's temporary.
You know, I've been studying this type of thing and personal growth pretty much all my life, and I have never heard this before.
Me neither. I happened upon it because of, the good people that my patients, my participants, people who taught me. They're my teachers, and so I just followed the clues, and I know how to speak science, and so I do think it's revolutionary. It's
I do
absolutely
too.
revolutionary.
It's a big find. It's a big,
Hmm.
big, big find.
Yeah.
And I think everybody listening and watching are just going to find this amazing because it's answering, for instance, this idea of imposter syndrome. I assume
Yeah.
we're talking about the same thing, right?
Yeah. It's a form of failure. You think you failed at being where you are, but you are exactly where, God puts you, like you can't believe it, because the world is not kind to beginners. There's no room for beginners. Like we put pressure on ourselves that we have to be an instant expert at everything, when we're first starting out. Like there's no grace, there's no mercy, but if we understand that that's just a way that we're failing, then and it kills our motivation to keep trying, and then we kind of like maybe may sabotage ourselves out of an opportunity that we were meant to have. And so that's really the dance here, is just like, how can you neutralize that form of failure? You're not failing. You're exactly where you need to be. And that's why calling on a higher power is very powerful. No pun intended there, but like, if you believe that you were called to do that and you were there for a reason, yeah, it may not be pretty, it may not be easy, it may not be immediate, but you have confidence that there's something bigger than you that put you there.
Yeah.
And that neutralizes that failure. If you're too focused on yourself, if you're too focused on the ego, like, we're too small to justify everything, or to explain everything that we're experiencing. There's a greater thing at play.
And this is, and I think it was you that mentioned it earlier, maybe it was before we even started here, talking about this idea of you know, I'm thinking about the importance of humility in all of this. And sort of the point that you're making is that if you somehow think it's just you winning or losing, um, maybe you're lucky enough to fall into that category that you just move into the winning lane and you win. But if you fall into the losing lane and have decided that you've lost, then
Mm-hmm.
that's it. There's no more to it. But if you believe there's a higher power, and um, that letting go of these thoughts and these ideas and these feelings that you have, it's this idea of letting go. I think I don't remember if you said
Mm-hmm.
this to me, but I've often asked people when they talked about this, whether it be spiritually or any other form, they would say, I just let go. Of course, in the
Yeah.
the Christian tradition, they talk about, being submitting their self to God, turning over
Mm-hmm.
their whatever, their life to God.
Yeah.
There's a science behind that, it sounds like.
There is, because you're neutralizing failure. You're not saying like, oh, I failed. There is no I. There is a, the great I am.
The great I am.
And so submitting to that and just seeing oneself as a learning being, a learning, trying, humble, apologetic, sometimes being a flawed
Yeah,
being, and just really, really embracing that there can be no failure. So that person is protected from failure.
it's crazy. That is absolutely nuts. Kyra, tell us about your books. I want to hear about your first book first. Tell us a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more about it. I mean, you've obviously been talking, from that book and your upcoming book, but tell us about your first
Mm-hmm.
book, Well Designed Life.
Yeah. So my intention there was basically like, what's the operating manual for this thing in our heads? Like, how does it work? Why does it work? Like, what are the misunderstandings about it? How do we work with it? That kind of thing. And so the through line with both books is like, you have this amazing machine inside of your skull, and yet we know so little about it, and we're learning more. And here's the things that are really important to know for the layperson, things like your self-image running everything, your emotions having a certain categories to it. Like, so the first book is kind of standing the test of time in terms of, just how to live and how to work with the brain. And then when I was working on the motivation chapter, which was the gnarliest one of the first book,
I can't
I
imagine.
ran into the habenula. It was early days. There was only like two studies that I put together, kind of like Reese's peanut butter and chocolate. Like, one was, if you failed, this thing lit up, but that was its own isolated study. And the second was, if this part of your brain is active, then this person has no motivation, or this animal has no motivation to keep trying the task. And so I was like, oh, those are related, and then ever since then, I'm a puzzle person, especially during the holidays. Like I do a lot of puzzles, and it, to me, I love the iteration of it, like, oh, and then this whole dock of puzzle pieces now hits to this one, and that kind of thing. So to me, it's been a puzzle assembly. And then all this other research came out about habenula controlling your hunger, habenula controlling your sleep, stress, suppressing your habenula and causing, binge eating. Like, this is everything. It's like we found the node, we found the central operating thing. And so the first book kind of opened the door to that and set the stage for that. And then the second book is a deep dive on how that collides with our society. My experience as a clinician, I was trained and taught to just scare people, like those cigarettes are going to kill you, like, instead of like knowing how to change behavior. But I was in a position in a seat of behavior change. I just was given information that really wasn't that effective, and including like SMART goals. I ran all these programs with SMART goals, like be super, what SMART goals are?
Yes, I do.
Specific,
Yes,
measurable. Yeah.
absolutely.
Like,
Yeah.
I was a true believer. I was dutiful. I implemented what I should have implemented. And every single time I saw no do gap, and I saw people avoiding their coach because they didn't do the thing in the SMART goal. So there was like a win-lose that I wasn't even seeing. We're sitting, it's like showing the water to the fish. We're sitting in this very performative society. And performative means there is a win and a lose. And if your confidence, your self-esteem cannot, endure the repeated battery of win and lose that is set up everywhere, everywhere. My niece was a competitive gymnast, and in her world, they had like SMART goals for like little girls,
Oh, interesting.
12-year-olds to
Yeah.
lose weight,
Yeah.
you
No.
know?
Yeah.
And so like these things, these methods are flawed. And then people are getting activated with their habenula because they're not doing the SMART goal on time or in the way that they should, or they could do it temporarily and then eventually they stop doing it. And then all that comes crashing down, all that
Yeah.
self-blame, all that I'm not motivated, all that failure comes in. We're just not protecting people from the failure.
That's interesting. And just for our audience who may not be familiar with SMART goals, I mean, it's just a simple framework that, specific, measurable, achievable, et cetera. And it's very interesting that you say that because I don't use them personally. I use it, I think, as it's intended, just as a framework to help me
Yeah.
clarify and,
Clarify is great. Yeah.
and put some kind of measure. I mean, I understand that, you want some sort of a measurement, that metric that you can kind of attach to. But then there's others who just use this as it's the only way. And
Hmm.
they get so I've seen people do, 2 or 3 pages of SMART goals. And I'm like, how are you going to remember any of that, and carry it around in your mind? But in any
I
event,
love its use and clarity.
clarity. Yeah.
I love performative tools like that in short bursts.
Yes.
But what we're not realizing is that we also have to say, and if this doesn't work, you're not the most horrible person on the planet. Just come back. We'll iterate. Like, iteration makes everything good. It's like duct tape. It corrects everything.
Wow. I mean, this idea of iteration has just blown my mind.
Hmm.
I've just never heard it applied this way. But as soon as you described it, I was like, that's it right there.
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
you're right. It gives you it does also, right? Iteration, if you will, puts you into this mindset of problem solving a little bit.
Yeah.
You're not just stuck in this, oh my God, it's so big. Let's just
Yeah.
break it down and kind of, okay, so that didn't work. Let's try this and this is that, as opposed to this overwhelming feeling that you have just failed and that's it.
Yeah. And great coaching helps you iterate. That's
Yes, I get
to
that.
a person. Every time I am dealing with a coach who's effective, it's because they're helping. They don't know the name of it yet, but that's what they're doing. They're
That's
better at iterating than other people.
and that comes in the form from a coach of
Hmm.
question asking.
Sure. Yeah.
Just is a simple question like, Is there another way to think about that? No.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of now I'm thinking of all these questions. I want to ask you this question that's going to take us off the beaten path here for just a
Yes,
moment, if you
please.
don't mind. So all the science that you've done on the human brain, and let's just expand that to humanity and spirituality and all those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What about that and AI?
Mm-hmm.
Do
Right.
you think about, because I'm hearing people, I've listened to some people who believe that, AI will eventually know how to feel. And I can't get my mind around that. I don't think so.
It depends. It
Oh,
depends.
oh,
Yeah, I think right now it's parroting and, putting together information. It has, of course, a much vaster ability to store and harvest and make sense of information than our brains consciously can.
yeah.
Although there's a part of our brain called, or there's a system in our brain called the implicit memory system, and that, excuse me, that is the means by which, every single pattern that we're ever exposed to is stored somehow, you know, and that, our pattern recognition builds out of that. So if you accelerate that, X number fold, that's what you have with AI. AI does not have, unless it codes itself to have this, it does not have emotional systems and structures for that. It does not have a habenula that like stops it from, touching the hot stove more than once, that kind of thing. And so those kinds of structures in the brain would need to have a correlation in the AI by the AI or somebody programming the AI in order to approximate the brilliance of the human mind. Now, will it be smarter than us in these other ways? Absolutely. Should we be worried about that and want to control some of that? Yes, absolutely. Are we are we going on an unwise path to have the pace of this technology be driven by greed? Yes.
Yes.
So there's things like that, and Tristan Harris, who was a contemporary of mine, he went to Stanford, he and I met there, and then he went to Google, and then he started something called the Center for Humane Technology or something like that. So he and his group are really at the forefront of calling into question, like, how do we slow this thing down so that we have the ability to use it for good and it doesn't just become a criminal operation.
Goodness gracious. What is his name again?
Tristan Harris.
Tristan Harris. Is he
Mm-hmm.
British? Is he the British gentleman?
No, he and
Okay.
his group put out an Emmy-winning documentary called The Social Dilemma
Oh, yeah.
about social media. Yeah,
Yes.
so he was
Okay.
behind
Okay.
that
Oh
project.
my, how interesting. So now
Yeah.
your second book, and I do want to ask, I appreciate you talking about the AI because I do think about it a fair amount and where it's all going.
Can
And
I say one more thing about that?
please do.
My own belief is
Yes.
that if humans can learn how to iterate or just lean into that, like not do it accidentally, but do it on purpose, if they can unblock themselves on their failure diseases types and all that kind of stuff, if they can stop overperforming for other people in order to be safe or belong or any of those kinds of things, then they will be empowered and this will not be a problem. That's my own belief,
Right.
is that like if we can teach the world to iterate, then because that's what AI is doing. It's basically a fast iteration machine.
That's crazy. That's fascinating. Now, in your books, where do you primarily speak about iteration?
Iteration is in the Unstoppable Brain. That is the focus.
So this is your
In
new
the
book.
Well-Designed Life, chapter 1, I talk about like designing and using iteration to design. So there's a continuity between the two books. The first book kind of sets up the second book, but the second book you can jump in just cold.
Is that right? And it will teach you about how to iterate
Yes,
in the context
yes.
that you're speaking of.
Yes, exactly. So I put together a framework in chapter 7 of the second book, Unstoppable Brain, that really goes through like a taxonomy of iteration. So things that I've studied tens of thousands of people. Like our software has 500,000 downloads at this point. We or 500,000 registered users. Like those numbers give us enough ability, and we never sell data. We never, I mean, it's completely, for good that we're doing all this. But like I
Yeah,
see all the ways in which people iterate and categorize those so that it's an easier way to look at iteration.
I see. And this is in the form of software.
Yeah, this is an app. There's always going to be
Tell
a
us
free
about the
version of
app.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Fresh Try is an app. It's for behavior change, habit formation. Most people use it for weight loss, but there's also like people who use it for mental health improvements or getting just healthier in general. And it is on both app stores. And we have, a free version that is not, right now it's completely free, and then we're going to put a low cost subscription model in for some of the more expensive things like the coaching, stuff like that for next year.
Wow. Uh, I mean, I'm just so fascinated and where Kyra can people find out about you, dive into you? I don't want to overstate this, but I just think what you've landed on here is very, very powerful. And I want the world to know what you're working on here and what you're doing. So tell us
Yeah.
where we can find you, how people can contact you, whatever the case might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So drkyrabobinet.com. And then my company is FreshTry.com.
Mm.
And then the books are available on Amazon and other places where you find books. And the second book, Unstoppable Brain, comes out March 29th, 2024.
You know, who do you help? Who should come looking for you? Be that businesses or people.
I think anyone who is afflicted with this no-do gap, who is afflicted with not knowing, like, why I want to do this, but I can't get myself to do it. That's really who I'm interested in working with.
Wow, that's fantastic. And so your book comes out, and I've written a book, and I know the at least for me, the pain that's involved in writing a book. So you've put a lot of effort into this, and I suppose you're going to be promoting it. But I have to ask a brilliant person like you, what's next?
To me, what's next, my vision, my hope is that the world will understand about this area of their brain, the habenula, and that will empower them to do better for themselves. And one way in which that is available is iteration. And I just want to spread the word of, like, habenula is what's wrong with you. Like, there's nothing wrong with you. Otherwise, once you know how to work with that, you will be free from all this other suffering that is unnecessary. And number two is iterate your way out of anything, and when you're going through hell, just keep going,
I love that.
iterate your way out of it. And that's the hope. And I think that's the empowering message that I want for everyone.
Surely there's a TED Talk in here somewhere, right?
One would hope.
I mean, do you speak for a living, by the way? Do you
I have
speak
spoken for,
professionally?
yeah,
I
I
mean, it
do.
it
I have.
seems like it seems like you would be in great demand, and I sure hope you are, especially after the second book comes out, because what you're offering here is, I can speak for myself, but again, as a coach, I know this from others that it's a widespread problem for those who are looking to succeed in whatever
Mm-hmm.
form, whatever they
Mm-hmm.
call success, but uh, they just get stumped and don't know
Mm-hmm.
why.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're developing the answers to all this. Well, listen,
Absolutely.
uh, Dr. Kyra Bobinet, I can't thank you enough for being on here. I know I say this to guests like you, who I know has put in a lot of research. You've done just a ton of work and blood, sweat, and tears. And now you're coming on Grow Yourself to share this with the world. And I just am so grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
The pleasure's mine.